Welcome to my show. I am with a guest here. Her name is Alison Mandel. Alison, how are you doing, ma?
I'm doing so well, thank you. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you very much, ma. Firstly, we know you are a former former executive TV executive producer. You're also an international work-life balance coach. You are also an executive team consultant, and you've also been into the production industry, and you've done so many work. Can you walk us through the journey, how you made it from the beginning, and how you are doing currently, ma?
Oh, sure. What a journey. Yeah. Um, I thought I wanted to work in television. I did want to work in television. And so I became a producer and started working in unscripted TV and kind of worked my way up through story producing, which is the type of production or producing role that handles the creative elements of an unscripted show. And so I worked my way up through that ladder and eventually became an executive producer. And so it's an executive producer in unscripted. It's also known as a showrunner. So it's the person that oversees the whole production in pre-production, field, and post. Um, and I was a director as well. So I direct talent and camera. And I did that for a while and I thought, this is what I want to do. And then I got there and I realized this is not what I want to do. That it really wasn't, what I thought it had been. And it was kind of the pinnacle of my career path. And yet I got there and I found myself working 7 days a week, 18 hours a day, usually away from home. And it's kind of one of those moments where you wake up and you think, well, there's got to be more to life than this. And so I started to kind of consult on the side for different companies and organizations, and also started to really look into why and how we were working this much as a people. It seemed really unnatural to me to be working 7 days a week, to have to sacrifice so much of my life force, who I was, to profit for a company. And so, as I really looked into that more and more, and I learned more about how capitalism works, our identity and our value, I started to really focus in on work life balance and scheduling and what does it mean to live a purposeful life. So I kind of started to move away from television and move towards consulting and coaching. I created a program called the Finding Time Program, where I work with people one on one on how to regain their work life balance and their sense of selves. And I finished my last television show ever in April of this year. So that's kind of the whole journey in a tiny little nutshell.
All right, ma. All right, ma. That's very good. Congratulations, ma. And I want to also ask, ma, do you have any book you are writing? Do you have any book you've published, or you are not thinking about writing any book?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I've thought about potentially writing something at some point, but I think right now my focus has really been on connecting with people and listening and discerning patterns in how we lose ourselves. So I think when I think about kind of energetically, I guess, the process of writing a book, it's really about kind of going inwards and distilling a culmination of knowledge that you've amassed through a variety of experiences. And I don't feel inwards yet. I still feel very much in the place of connecting with other people and gaining more insight into how we can find that alignment within ourselves. And I'm really starting to pick up on some really fascinating themes between different types of people and the way that they kind of lose themselves. So the book thing in the future on the horizon line, but right now I'm way too excited about working with people individually and organizations.
All right, Ma. Thank you for that, Ma. I will also want to ask, in your own understanding, what do you think self-advocacy mean? What does it mean to you, Ma?
Self advocacy, I think, is a really interesting subject that is usually referred to in the sense of advocating for your own needs in an environment that does not prioritize what's necessary for you. So, for instance, if you're at a job, typically because we are in a capitalist society, when we're working in a job, the focus is on getting as much labor extracted from you for the least amount of cost. So you have the highest profit. And so self advocacy usually looks like really holding strong to your needs, and being respected with your manager, your supervisor, your team, the organization, et cetera. If we're talking about in a professional sense, and then in a personal sense, in your relationships in a way where you feel heard. I think that the thing that is often missed when it comes to discussing self advocacy is actually knowing what you really need. So there's kind of this step that can be missed sometimes on a deeper level. Now, again, if say your boss is, you know, pushing you to work more than what you had originally agreed upon or giving you assignments that do not fit within your job description, it's very clear. You self advocate by saying, you know, these are my boundaries. This is how I work. And this is what needs to be acknowledged. But when it comes to kind of greater work or purpose work or having a sense of meaning, I think self advocacy really looks like having a practice. You have to know the self first. So, having a practice, having something to come back to that is generative and nourishing and centering so that you actually know who you are and where you're going, so that when you advocate for yourself, it's in the direction that you want to go in. So, for instance, if you're at a job and they're really, it's quite a manipulative environment, you can advocate for, you know, getting fewer jobs to be, you know, sent to you, or less work or more respected hours. But if you don't actually know what you want from your career, or you don't actually know what kind of role you want at that organization, or the kind of life that you're trying to build, you can advocate in a way that is a little bit myopic or short-sighted for where you're actually trying to go. And in another way of saying it, you can be reactive instead of kind of creative or generative for your own process.
All right, Ma. Thank you very much for that, Ma. And I would also like to ask, how can people or individual, who are recovering, how can they begin to, practice self-advocacy? Is there any way someone can begin to practice it? Someone who is recovering.
Ways that you can begin to practice self advocacy, I think the first thing is having time set aside in your day where you're actually meeting yourself where you're at. And that seems so vague, but it can really be like, are you someone who knows what your body needs? Are you taking care of your body? Are you taking care of your health? Are you listening to the diagnosis that you've been given? Are you heeding the warnings that people kind of consistently give you to rest more or eat differently, or any of the things that would create a greater sense of well being? Especially because our health can really block us from having an experience of clarity. So, for instance, if you're like eating, I mean, it's so simple, but it's so important. If you're eating something you're allergic to constantly, you will not be able to have real moments of relaxation and peace because your body's really inflamed, and inflammation blocks all kinds of processes in terms of clarity and a sense of self. Um, and so something like that is an example. So, really taking care of yourself, I think, first and foremost, and meeting yourself where you're at. Getting quiet with yourself is another way of putting it. So, a lot of times people meditate, or they go on walks, or they work out, or anything that makes them feel closer to themselves. But again, getting out of that place of reaction and into that place of stillness. I am a huge advocate for getting away from your phone. So if you can get away from your phone for a little bit, most of us start our day with our phones. Our phones are our alarm clocks. And then we open our phone and we check our email and we look at our social media. You're already out of your sense of self, right? You're already reacting to the world around you. And if you can meet yourself before you invite the world in through your electronics, you can get to know who you are and what you actually want. So if someone's listening to this and they're like, I wonder what this looks like for me, you can ask yourself, what do you actually want? And if you made no changes and you were where you are here in 5 years, would you be happy? That's a really important question. If you know the answers to that and you know what you really want, you start advocating for yourself in a really different way because you're pushing for a future that you're creating instead of allowing a present that is mildly comfortable, which is really, I think, how a lot of us live day to day.
Yes, ma. Thank you very much for that, ma. And I want to, ask, how can family and friends, how can they support, someone who is into self-advocacy, ma?
How can they support someone? Hmm. I think a lot of people have friends that and family that can see when things are out of balance. So there's three main areas that I typically focus on within, there's like work-life balance. And then that actually looks like to me three different areas. One is health, one is relationships, and one is kind of spiritual or inner well-being. And I think if you are someone who sees someone out of balance or is hoping that they will advocate for themselves more or choose a more I always self-advocacy is fantastic. I also use the term sovereignty a lot. And if you are hoping that someone takes care of themselves more, is more proactive, or another way of saying it is finding agency in their life, I think you can lovingly say what you've noticed and then be patient because no one is going to do something because someone badgers them. Many of us struggle with self advocacy because of shame. So if they feel like someone's shaming them, that's actually going to make them more ashamed and less likely to advocate for themselves. And then be really encouraging when you do see signs of something that is uplifting, healthy, and supportive.
All right, ma. Thank you very much, ma. No, I'm thinking maybe you have a story. So I want to ask, can you share with us any story where you think self-advocacy as, make plays a huge, difference in your recovery, ma?
Hmm. Myself. When I was working in television, there is a real misunderstanding that they really push that if you won't do it, someone else will do the job for less. So there's a real scarcity mindset that's really intense and total bullshit and also really damaging. So there's a lot of people who, if you suggest, no, I'm not working past 10 p.m. tonight because the call is at 6 a.m. tomorrow, and that means that I won't have enough time to sleep. There are a lot of people who will say, I don't care. There are plenty of producers or there are plenty of whatever who will do that. And so you should do that because otherwise you're going to lose your job. And I think that really holding strong in my past of saying, that's fine, then you can go find another person who will do that. I'm not doing that. Calling the bluff is something that I've done a lot in these kind of groups or in these industries. Um, so that's something that I've certainly done to self-advocate. Just saying like, there's no way I'm doing this. That is totally unhealthy. And if you're looking for someone who operates on a really unhealthy level, then you're going to find someone who gives you subpar results. Um, Also, I think the number one way I've self-advocated was I listened to myself when I realized I wasn't happy. So many people are unhappy in their jobs. And maybe it's the industry that they don't like, or it's the specific organization or structure of their job or current, assignment they have, but they don't listen to themselves when they are deeply unhappy, when they're overworked, when they're stressed. And I think the number one thing that I've done for myself was really acknowledge when I was unhappy and made risky change without knowing that there was a safety net to catch me, because I would rather make choices that support my integrity and are in alignment with what matters to me and risk, financial insecurity or being judged than doing what was expected of me because it was comfortable. It's really, really hard to do. Um, but that is something that I think is probably the number one thing. I've always kind of known if I was happy or not and really acted upon it, and then was very clear in my communication about it. I hope that answers your question.
All right, man. Thank you very much. It answers it. I want to ask, so how can we self-advocate when it means risking our sense of security?
Ah, this is like my favorite question. Capitalism is a hellscape and we're all stuck in it. So I think that there's so much around this because a lot of people are like, sell everything you have and, live on an alpaca farm and, you know, do whatever. It's very challenging for people to have to figure out how to advocate for themselves without changing every part of their lives. And also, I think most people do a lot of what they do because they have to, because it's what gives them health insurance, or it's what provides so they can keep the lights on, or they can pay for their children's education. And that fear is extremely real. And the situations that we put our communities in, our citizens in, because of capitalism, means that we have to make unnatural choices all the time. So I think this is something that deserves an extraordinary amount of compassion and a lot of support, because it is very, very hard to make choices that risk you being able to pay for your life, pay for your health, pay for your education, pay for your food. So I think with that, it's about making small changes or making changes that are robust in research, as in not deciding one day you've had it and then quitting your job and not having a plan of where you're going to go to next. Unfortunately, it requires strategy to be really clear about what direction you're going in and how you're going to provide for yourself and what is that going to look like and what's your backup plan. There are a lot of coaches out there who say if you have a plan B, you're not committed to your plan A. And I think those coaches, I don't know if I'm allowed to curse on here, are full of shit. Because I think that if you can say that you're a trust fund baby, like if you can just decide that there is no plan B and you're just going to go for it, that probably means you have an incredible security net that most people don't have. So I think it's totally fine to have a plan B, but if you have a really strong relationship with yourself and what you want, you will keep that as your North Star. You'll keep that as your horizon line. But I think that planning and supporting yourself allows you to take really big risks and have it not feel so risky because you know that you have your bases covered.
All right, ma. Thank you so much for that, ma. And I want to, I would like to ask, what role do you think, awareness, what role do you think self-awareness play, during the time of self advocacy, ma?
I think self awareness is huge because, again, kind of towards the beginning, if you don't actually know what you want, you'll advocate out of reaction instead of out of a place of creation and alignment. I think that self awareness is a much more multifaceted and complicated mm, element to hold within ourselves, because it requires consistency and openness and reception. But I think that self awareness is, if you're advocating without self awareness, you are consistently a victim to your circumstances. So the more you can have a sense of your inner world, the more you can create. And again, advocacy looks totally different and what that might look like in practice. If you were at a job and your boss was just absolutely terrible to you, right? You have a pretty abusive boss, or they're really rude, or they're really bad at their jobs, and you don't have an awareness of yourself, you might constantly be advocating for your boss to be less terrible, for your job to, for your role in your job to be better, for him or her to leave you alone so you can get your work done, etc. If you have a sense of self-awareness and you know that the organization or the type of industry that you're in is really not what you want to be doing, then then your boss is not your problem. Your job is. And so you actually will treat your boss differently because you should probably leave that organization and you probably need a really good reference. And so, the way that you respond to their behavior changes. And self advocacy looks like you setting up a career shift in a lateral, or I mean, hell, if you can get a better job, great, but usually a lateral shift to a different industry, and you take your focus off of your boss because your boss really isn't the problem because you don't really want to be there anyway. So that's an example of how self-awareness can be really key when it comes to what does advocacy look like in action.
All right, Ma. Thank you so much for that, Ma. And I would also like to ask, how can one develop confidence for self-advocacy, and, in face of discrimination or things like that? How can one develop confidence, Ma?
Well, in face of discrimination is different because that's a much larger question in terms of the types of discrimination and the support you have and the resources you have. Um, Discrimination is pretty embedded in most organizational systems. So that is that depends on how resourced you are. But there is a through line from either, which is that you have a deep and unflickering, unwavering sense of self, regardless of your external world. So, in the program that I do in Finding Time, and then generally in my workshops and such, there is kind of one major focus, which is that when we have our world, when the majority of our experience every day, how happy we are, how peaceful we are, how confident we are, is based on our external stimuli, on our surroundings, on our context, we will always be victims to the vicissitude of what life brings. So if you are happy because work went well one day and then work went to shit one day and you're very upset, or if your joy or your sense of self or your sense of value is determined by the feedback that you're getting or what have you, then you will never be happy because you're always going to be waiting for the next thing to come that can throw you off. And so, really, the work that I like to focus on, and I focus on it because I've been studying spiritual teachings and such for 20 years. And there's a real through line here, which is your relationship to kind of your inner knowing, your inner self. You could say divinity, you can say soul, you can say whatever you want. It's really kind of your essence. And if you belong to yourself, truly belong to yourself, then nothing in the external world can shake you. I mean, this is not my trademark line here. This is what every major spiritual thinker has taught, which is that kind of, inner world, that inner relationship to what animates the perceived external world. If we can have an unshakable faith in or relationship or sense of belonging to ourselves, then we have natural confidence. There's the difference between confidence and arrogance is that you don't really care if the meeting goes well. If you're arrogant, you need the meeting to go well because you're constantly looking to prove your greatness. So that's the difference between, if someone's truly confident, then it doesn't matter. You are detached from the results of your interactions because you have such a rich inner experience that the outside world cannot tell you how you deserve to feel. So that takes a lot of work. And some of us, especially if we've faced exceptional discrimination or subtle discrimination, really any type of oppressive force, um, that is much more challenging to come by. And having compassion for that part of the process too. If you're someone who isn't confident, beginning with compassion about, of course you are, and kind of holding, of course you are, in the sense of holding that part of you tenderly with understanding, um, and knowing that you've been through a lot and that you can only find confidence through compassion first.
All right, Sma. Thank you very much for that, Sma. I really appreciate it. I would also like to ask, are they, are there any are there any organization you can recommend, for those who are just, trying to improve their self-advocacy skills? Is there any organization, you can recommend, Ma?
Oh my goodness, there's so many organizations. I would say, however, I don't typically think of organizations initially, because I think that, in my experience anyway, when I've been seeking, I I usually look to specific speakers or writings or books, because it's such a personalized and internal process that organizations require, emoting and communicating and things like that. So I would say I think Trisha Hersey and the Nat Ministry is exceptional. Um, and I think that's a really, really important resource. And then the kind of spiritual thinkers that I tend to always gravitate towards are people like, I mean, when it comes to self advocacy, these are all quite spiritual people. So the people, though, that I look towards are always going to be Ram Dass, Alan Watts, Sharon Salzberg, Tara Brach, um, Michael Singer. Um, those are kind of the people that I typically lean towards, because they remind me that the thinking mind and the external world are distractions from our real experience here. And I think if we can really grasp that and start to embody that in our daily lives, then self advocacy is a natural byproduct.
All right, Sma. Thank you very much for that, Sma. I also know, generally, like, what advice would you give to someone, who is struggling to find their voice in their recovery journey, ma?
I mean, I love this question. I think the first thing that I would say is I would hope that they find an enormous amount of compassion for themselves. And if they were to write their story down of all the things that have happened to them, and then forget that it was theirs and have another person bring it to them, would they ever be as harsh to that person as they are being to themselves? I think is always a good place to start. Like, feeling that amount of compassion and empathy is a really helpful way to begin anything, because if you don't have compassion for yourself, you will not get far because you're already starting not on your own team. So there's nowhere really to go. So you got to be on your own team. And then I would say to get really, really quiet about what you want. Some great questions to ask, especially if you're feeling really lost, which I think a lot of people are. They don't really know what to do next. They don't know what they want. What is always asking yourself, what has always been true for me? What is something that has always been true for me and who I am? And that can be interests or things that you care about or things in your heart to be true. So I think that's a really important place to kind of go, is really asking yourself, what is inherently your truth, kind of no matter what, so that you can start to befriend and align with yourself. I also think it's an often overlooked question, especially when we're talking about things like business and self-advocacy and all of those things. People really don't like asking themselves, what does their body need? It's a really important question. Most people are exhausted, they're burnt out, um, their bodies are shut down, or they're hyper vigilant, and you cannot get very far in terms of where you want to go and what you want to do if your body is burnt out, if your body's sick. It will block your clarity. It will block your ability to have a sense of self and to show up in the way you want to show up in the world. So, also making sure you're taking care of your body. And then I think most importantly is believing that you are here for a reason. You know, I think you either believe in pure entropy and everything is chaos, or there's an order to things. My understanding of quantum physics and the nature of the world, this is my personal understanding. I think there's a beautiful order to everything, which means that everyone is here for a reason. It sounds really corny, but if you actually believe that, then you believe that there is a role for you in the world. And if you can align and be as much of yourself as possible, the universe will kind of, it wants you to be in it, right? It wants you here. And if you can take care of yourself and really be your best friend in this journey, as you're saying, the journey of recovery, if you can really be your best friend, then you can find your space, because the implication of being on the road to recovery is that you were lost and you were trying to find your path. And so having your own back, listening to what you need, but then believing that the path will meet your foot as you step, so long as you are listening to what you know to be true within you, is exceptionally powerful, because then you can start to act out of a place of deep knowing again instead of reaction.
All right, ma. Thank you very much, ma. And there's a question I normally ask, just in short way, short sentence. From the ancestors, from the past, from the forefathers. If there's anything you will love or you would like to bring back to our time today, what do you think that thing would be, ma?
I mean, systems of care and a community and a lineage of support. The fact that we all live, I mean, I'm speaking, um, in the United States, we all live such isolated lives, and it's completely insane and unnatural. So, like, I'm pregnant right now, for instance, and it's totally unnatural to be pregnant in the United States, in the sense that you're alone for so much of it. And we're not supposed to, we're supposed to have multiple generations around us showing us the way and creating, the quote unquote red tent. And, that's just an example of, we are meant to be in community and in deeper connection. And so I would 100% bring that back first and foremost, because the more disparate we are, the more we believe we're separate from each other, the more polarized we are politically, religiously, emotionally, financially. Oh my God, when we look at the economics of this world right now and hoarding of wealth, I think that really happens when we are exceptionally separate from each other, because that's the only way it could happen. So that would 100% be the first thing that I would bring back. And then number two, even though I wasn't allowed a second choice, I'm going to add a second choice in here, would be a remembrance that we are all connected in a way that we don't understand, and in a way that exceeds our ability to comprehend. And I think there's a lot of indigenous cultures around us that had that deep knowing. And then we were like, fuck it, let's just let's worship the internet. And now, or labor or, the industrial age. And so we lost a lot of the kind of magic and animism that is in our life that I think really connects us and reminds us of how special this all is. So again, kind of a corny answer, but true for me.
All right, Ma. I want to really appreciate you from the bottom of my heart for the time and efforts you put into my show. I want to say thank you so much, Ma. I really appreciate it, Ma.
You're welcome. This is an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for spending the time with me.
All right, sir. I love you. Bye bye. I wish you wonderful.
Thank you.